I'm a historian. Being a historian means that I research a lot. Researching means reading a lot, and reading a lot has given me a strong set of opinions. As a result of all this, I'm also a campaigner who believes in doing the right thing for the past. To me, doing the right thing for the past is recognising the figures forgotten and overshadowed by time. It means to learn from the past and to ensure that notable previous lives are remembered and recognised for their achievements. But how did this reader, researcher and campaigner come into being? Well, here's my story. When I was 5 years old, my parents were horrified to discover that I could not read any of my high-frequency keywords. These are the words that all UK school children are expected to learn by a certain age. In order to rectify this, my mother took me into my bedroom for 1 week during the summer holidays, armed with only a pile of flashcards and a sharp tongue. My task? To learn to read all of the words on the cards. We argued loads, but at the end of every day, I received a prize for learning more and more words. I could recognise a good deal when I saw one. Unbeknownst to my dear mother, she had unleashed a monster. Upon my release from incarceration, I read everything, and I mean everything. Cereal boxes, road signs, party political leaflets, and of course, my all-time favourite being the tube train newspapers. I was unstoppable. I was then given a teenage edition of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. All of a sudden, I was in the big league. I adored it. So excited did this text make me that when aged 5, I went to 221B Baker Street and met Mr. Holmes, I went into a state of uncontrollable mania, involving screaming, crying and shaking. Poor Sherlock himself was unsure of how to deal with a manic 5-year-old who had read all of his books. Outside of school, my reading brought great pleasure. However, it proved to be less than popular within the school setting, where on any given day I could be found reading Jane Austen in my maths lesson or Bronte in sports, where school's expectations were clashing with my passion for the written word. My teachers would take a book off me, only to turn around and find that another one would be in its place. It's not that they were trying to discourage my reading. In fact, they were quick to tap into my interest by making me a school librarian, albeit one with a reputation for creating increasingly more intricate and complex filing systems, and woe betide anyone who didn't adhere to these. Like a giant computer, I was pulling in information from everything around me, learning more about the world, politics, history, and science. As all of this new information accrued inside my consciousness, I began to notice the things that needed changing in the world around me, and how they could be changed for the better. All of this new information that was mounting up inside my head was creating ideas and a desire to find out even more. And then another life-changing moment happened. I discovered the public library. The first moment that I entered, I fell in love. It felt magical, as though thousands of new worlds had been suddenly opened up just for me. As I read more and more varied books, from historical novels, the classics, science fiction, fantasy, non-fiction, and goodness only knows how many others, I began to realise that the library, my sanctuary, was an immensely valuable resource for not just me, but the whole community. This was where all the knowledge was stored, and I wanted more and more of it. One day, aged 6 years old, whilst luxuriating amongst the books, I read an article about homeless people. It seemed that there were thousands. How can this be? I pondered. This can't be right. And then I remembered from my trip to Baker Street, all of the people that I had seen huddled in sleeping bags in shop doorways, and I had not understood why. At this very moment, a new part of me was born. I had become a person with influence, a campaigner. And the victims of my first ever campaign? My parents. I collected leaflets and made notes about the homeless, facts, figures, and all sorts of reasons why they should fund a room for a homeless teenager, which they still do. In fact, some years later, I convinced my father to join me on the annual homeless sleep out in London, an event my poor dad would have probably enjoyed a lot more if he hadn't been in the midst of a chest infection. That said, hearing the various speakers share their recollections of life on the streets was a truly humbling experience. Next up, a young family friend developed cancer, so aged 8, I cooked a cancer charity lunch for the neighbours. £5 a plate, I was on a roll. As I've got older, life has become more difficult and more complicated, Apparently there was a recession or a credit crunch or a library wrecking ball or something evil. My library, and many like it, was to close. So at 10 years old, I took on the big one, Lincolnshire County Council. My target, people like me. I wrote and printed off information sheets, posters and petition forms and delivered them to every school in the area. I contacted Lord Melvin Bragg, who originally presided over the opening of the new Lincoln Central Library in 1996. Lord Bragg is a major radio and TV presenter and an avid Save the Library campaigner who quickly promised to support my cause to save my local village library. And I was off. This was not as simple as I thought it was going to be, however, as the schools did not just act upon my information, and I had to chase them several times. Even the school I attended at the time was very slow to get started, but my persistence paid off. By the end of my campaign, I collected 2,000 signatures and very proudly delivered them to the County Council officers. When, several weeks later, I discovered that my campaign to save my local library had successfully contributed to the overall efforts to keep the library open, I was ecstatic. The library was safe and the access to a huge number of books, nearly as many as my own collection, was still available. So far, so good. A homeless teenager has somewhere to sleep, a cancer charity has a little bit more money, and my local library was open. And as for me, I was learning that every human being has the power to make change. And in my case, it all started with books. Books have the power to transport you to different places and times. I like to go back in time in my books. I'm particularly interested in powerful medieval women. This is a place called the past. They do things differently there. And it was in the past that I met Catherine Swynford. One of the most influential women in Europe during the 14th century, Catherine Swynford was incredible. As the long-time mistress then wife of John of Gaunt, Catherine faced many trials. Some similar to the struggles faced by many women of the period: separation from her partner away on campaign, the fragility of protecting inheritances, but also trials much more uncommon, including being publicly denounced as a she-devil and enchantress by Thomas Walsingham, a contemporary radical Benedictine monk, as well as facing the vicious speculation and gossip of the court and Lancastrian household. As most of you will be aware, many countries have commemorative plaques celebrating famous buildings and the people who lived there. In the United Kingdom, these are traditionally blue. Some noteworthy blue plaques include Sherlock Holmes, fictional and at the wrong address, Winnie the Pooh, not a real bear, and a cannon in Norfolk which may or may not have been part of a famous battle. Nobody's quite sure. But despite her fame and infamy, Catherine Swynford is, as far as I can tell, globally without a plaque. I have always really enjoyed seeing blue plaques whilst visiting new places, and have long been aware that my hometown of Lincoln, despite its huge cultural heritage, has shockingly few plaques. In fact, according to Open Plaques, a register of commemorative plaques worldwide, there are a mere 24, of which only 7 commemorate people, including William Byrd, a 16th century composer of hymns, the site of whose now long gone home is just a few doors away from Catherine Swynford's. Unlike Catherine's, however, the original house no longer stands. In Catherine's case, apart from the fascia, her home remains largely as it appeared in the 14th century. You will be pleased to know that of this list of 24 plaques, there is one which mentions a female name, a lady called Mother. However, Mother is in fact a World War I tank. That's right. Out of Lincoln's 24 commemorative plaques, not one of them celebrates any of Lincoln's great female lives. How is this relevant to Catherine Swynford? Well, despite her global fame and popularity, in the United Kingdom, a surprisingly small number of people have heard of Catherine, despite the fact that she is a direct ancestor of every English monarch since 1461, when Edward IV claimed the throne. If you find this difficult to believe, please feel free to do your own research. It really is true. In fact, her lineage is almost certainly the strongest and most important in English history. I realised that the obvious solution to the problem of creating recognition and awareness of Catherine would be to have a blue plaque placed upon her former home, Lincoln Chancery, which is located in the historic heart of the city and opposite Lincoln Cathedral, where she married John of Gaunt and is now buried alongside her daughter Joan Beaufort. So I decided to start a Catherine Swynford Twitter campaign to get her a blue plaque. The Twitter campaign attracts a lot of comment from influential quarters, some positive and some less than positive. It seems that even now, over 600 years later, Catherine Swynford still has her dissenters. And as everybody knows, all publicity is good publicity. Some of this negative publicity served well to keep the momentum of the campaign going as fans of Catherine jumped to her defence. And believe me, she has an immense global fan base. Pretty soon the media became involved, and I found myself being interviewed by 2 radio stations, including the BBC. This led to some really positive networking, where I gained the support of some highly influential figures, including 1 Earl, 1 Lord, 1 Baroness, and a former BBC Radio 1 DJ. At the moment, I'm extremely hopeful that Catherine Swynford will get her blue plaque. And why? Because one person learnt to read, and that person learnt to love books and to assimilate the knowledge contained within, and that knowledge gave the power to make change. Because seeking leads to knowledge, knowledge leads to strength, and strength gives you the power to stand up for what you believe in. Thank you.